أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم تبت يدا أبي لهب وتب ما أغنى عنه ماله وما كسب سيصلى نارا ذات لهب وامرأته حمالة الحطب في جيدها حبل من مسد بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم قل هو الله أحد الله الصمد لم يلد ولم يولد ولم يكن له كفوا أحد بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم قل أعوذ برب الفلق من شر ما خلق ومن شر غاسق إذا وقب ومن شر غاسق إذا وقب ومن شر النفاثات في العقد ومن شر حاسد إذا حسد بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم قل أعوذ برب الناس ملك الناس إله الناس من شر الوسواس الخناس الذي يوسوس في صدور الناس من الجنة والناس. I have recited 4 surahs, the last 4 surahs, and the translation of these 4 surahs is as follows. In the name of Allah, that is Surah Al-Lahab. In the name of Allah, the Gracious, the Merciful, perish the 2 hands of Abu Lahab, and perish he. His wealth and what he has earned shall avail him naught. Soon shall he burn in a blazing fire, and his wife too, bearer of slander. Round her neck shall be a halter of twisted palm fiber. Surah Al-Ikhlas. In the name of Allah, the Gracious, the Merciful, say, He is Allah, the One. Allah, the Independent and besought of all, As-Samad. Allah, the Independent and besought of all. He begets not, not is He begotten. Of course, I have some reservations regarding the translation, but I'll speak of that later on. I'm reading from the translation made by Mullah Ghulam Farid Sahib. وَلَمْ يَكُنْ لَهُ كُفُوًا أَحَدٌ, and there is none like unto him. Al-Falaq. In the name of Allah, the Gracious, the Merciful, say, I seek refuge in the Lord of the dawn from the evil of that which He has created, and from the evil of darkness when it overspreads, and from the evil of those who blow upon the knots of mutual relationship to undo them. This is in italics, the last bit. And from the evil of those who blow upon the knots. That's the verse, translation of the verse. The rest is explanation. And from the evil of the envier when he envies. Surah An-Nas. In the name of Allah, the Gracious, the Merciful, say, I seek refuge in the Lord of mankind, the King of mankind, the God of mankind, from the evil whisperings of the sneaking whisperer, who whispers into the hearts of men from among jinn and men. Why I started with the Surah Surah Al-Lahab, is because last year I started with Surah Al-Nasr, and I explained the connection of the Surah Al-Nasr with the preceding surah, and I was yet to explain the connection between Surah Al-Nasr and this surah when I found that time was too short and hurriedly I had to shift to other areas of attention. So that is why I have taken this up today. The most important question which arises before one is that in Surah Al-Nasr, if you remember well, there is a glad tidings of complete victory, a great victory indeed, in which Hazrat Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, the founder of Islam, is assured that people would begin to enter Islam in armies, no longer in hundreds or thousands, but in armies. And Al-Fathu would appear, which means all doors which obstruct the passage of Islam will break open, and no hindrance, no obstruction would permit it to stand in the way of final victory of Islam. So after this glad tidings of final victory, suddenly we find something else mentioned which is of quite a bleak nature, which speaks of dangers, which is potent of future threats to Islam. Of course, this subject is discussed in a manner as to reassure the Muslims that no conspiracies against Islam would be permitted to work. But why is it that Surah Nasr is mentioned before Surah Al-Lahab, and why is it that after the complete glad tidings of a great victory, glad tidings of a complete victory, suddenly you find mention of some imminent dangers to Islam? Again, there is another important thing to be understood about the dates of revelation of these two surahs. Surah Al-Nasr, which precedes Al-Lahab, was one of the last surahs, in fact, though not the last verses, but this was a surah which was revealed very close to the last days of Hazrat Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, in fact, very close to his death or demise. So some commentators have put the date of this surah to about 80 days, from 70 to 80 days before the demise of Hazrat Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. So this is the last surah which is revealed as one surah, although there are verses revealed later on which made part of other surahs. But this seems to be the last surah, the last chapter of the Holy Quran. And Surah Al-Lahab, on the other hand, is one of the earliest ones. Some commentators have put, and most agree on this, its date to be around so early that it is supposed to be, or understood to be, the fifth surah ever revealed. So this surah is so early, it's the fifth in order of revelation. And this is mentioned at the end. Why? These are the two particular questions which have to be addressed. So, again, considering the shortage of time, I'll try to be very brief because I have to cover some other important subjects this evening. In Surah Nasr we find mentioned in the end an advice at some imminent dangers which are mentioned by way of an advice to pray to God and to seek forgiveness from Allah from sins and shortcomings, and also to extol His praises. I explained to you earlier that shows that all victories bring in their wake some dangers. People become proud. Particularly when you receive religious victories, you have to be always on guard against these dangers of attributing these victories to what you have earned through your efforts. And also, in great religious victories, there are imminent dangers of those new people who have joined your faith to bring some evil doctrines and evil practices along with them to the new faith they have accepted. Because it is not possible to immediately instruct all the newcomers in the best possible manners so that to leave no loopholes and to train them in the best practices. So there is always a danger of new people bringing bad habits, bad traditions, evil thinkings, evil practices and so on and so forth, which may ultimately develop into very serious dangers to the very purity of faith and sometimes the very survival of the faith. So that was the ending of the first surah. Now we turn to this surah, Tabbat Yada Abi Lahabin. It speaks of a very grave danger, not of connected with the immediate future of Islam, but a remote future of Islam. So the battle is not over. And this shows that the first victory promised is the victory pertaining to the early progress of Islam and the early period of Islam. The battle would not be over. There will be other people and other continents to be won over to Islam. Islam would not emerge supreme in its first procession forward or march forward to conquer other faiths. But ultimately this is bound to happen. So before that happens, there are very grave dangers to be confronted by the world of Islam. And in Surah Abu Lahab, those dangers have been pinpointed and the warning has been delivered very effectively and completely, indicating in fact who the people would be and where do the dangers lie. Hazrat Muslim Maud Radhiyallahu Ta'ala Anhu, in his commentary both of Surah Nasr and Surah Lahab, has dealt the subject most exquisitely and beautifully. And I advise you to read all that commentary yourself, otherwise you will be missing so much. It's impossible for me to reproduce all that in such short time. But he has unraveled the mystery of Surah Al-Lahab in a manner that has never been done before in the last 1400 years. In fact, it was Hazrat Masih Maud who first pointed out that this surah applied to the age of Masih Maud and the dangers which Islam would face in that age. Previously, all the Muslim commentators, unfortunately, had been considering this surah to be of a very narrow application and have been connecting it to some incidents which were very insignificant and small and transient, which had no permanent value. So they believed that Abu Lahab was the kunya or the nickname of one of the uncles of Hazrat Rasul Kareem sallallahu alaihi wasallam, whose name was? No. Abu Lahab ka name or naam was Uzza, Abdul Uzza. His name was Abdul Uzza. He was one of the uncles. And they say that in the first delivery of his message or prophecy, when he gathered all the tribes of Quraysh living in Mecca or their representatives around the Mount Safa and delivered that famous sermon of his, addressing them and telling them that if I told you that there was an army of invaders hiding behind this small hillock, would you believe? And they all said with one accord, yes, we would believe you. Because you are such a truthful person. That was what was implied. You never told lies. While if you imagine how big that hill is, if you know that how big that hill is, you will positively disbelieve any claimant that he has seen an army hiding behind that small hillock. It's called a hill, but it's a very small plateau, like, rising of a mound-like thing. Not at all like a mountain. And no big army could hide itself behind its shelter. But such was the trust people laid in Hazrat Muhammad Mustafa Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam's truth that they responded, yes, we will believe. Then he announced his ministry, his prophethood, and said, I have been appointed by God to deliver this message. Now would you believe? And the first man who turned his back against him and who attemptedly insulted him by saying tabbalak, that curse be upon you, you be destroyed. That sort of prayer was now made by Abu Lahab, the person we have just discussed. So because he used the word tabba, so God revealed this surah to counter his ill prayer, ill wish of Muhammad Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, and declaring that you will be destroyed and both your hands. Now why Abu Lahab? This was a very difficult part for people to explain. So the commentators who have been tying down this wonderful verse, carrying messages of such import as to as to apply to hundreds of years of relevant future to Islam, they say he was said Abu Lahab. He was given this nickname Abu Lahab because he was very fair in complexion, and because fire is also glowing, so as if his face was aglow. That is why he was called Abu Lahab. But then, why his wife is referred to as carrying, this wood, or what is it? Let me say. Zat al-Abim wamratu hammalat al-hatab, firewood. Why is she referred to be carrying firewood? Did she do anything to enhance the fairness of his husband's complexion? So it is not connected at all. Hazrat Muslim Maud Radhiyallahu Ta'ala Anhu has commented beautifully on this subject, on this surah, and explained and proved beyond a shadow of doubt with historical references that this does not refer to Abu Lahab, the so-called Abu Lahab, that is Abu Luzza. This surah speaks of a very strong enemy of Islam who will inflame people against Islam, who will raise huge fires, build huge fires to destroy Islam. And when Imra is mentioned, that is translated wrongly, as I said, as wife, the word Imra in Arabic does not necessarily apply to a wife. It also applies to any weaklings who follow someone, any subordinates who fall under the influence of some superior authority or powerful person. So he said here, Imra refers to those abettors of this crime, those smaller nations, as he has explained, who would follow a more powerful nation in their efforts to destroy Islam without knowing what they are doing. So in this context, we begin to understand the connection between this and Surah An-Nasr more clearly. In Surah An-Nasr, some immediate dangers to Islam were mentioned in the end, for which God advised us instructed us to pray especially to Allah to save Islam from those imminent dangers which are imminent upon a great victory, which always follow such victories. But that will not be the end of the matter. A time would come when grave new dangers would appear in the world. Very powerful nations would appear who would attempt to destroy Islam and from the face of the earth, to annihilate it. And their particular, now let's say, they could be recognized by their relation to fire. The word fire can be understood metaphorically as well as literally. But these people would have a definite connection with fire. Now when taking this cue from Hazrat Muslim Maud, I further pondered over this, then it came to my mind that the Jal is mentioned to be a people who would have a full command over fire. They will invent new modes of travel which would be powered by fire. And their great victory over the world, political victory over the world, would be mainly due to their firepower. Also, they are referred to elsewhere in the Holy Quran as having a superior firepower in their battles and wars against others. So the word fire is literally applicable to the modern Christian great powers and also to the communist powers who are an offshoot of the same people but in a different way. So both these most powerful blocks which have appeared in the world, their strength is based on fire. Their mode of travel is entirely dependent on fire. Their wars among themselves and with others are mainly the firepower wars, and they are described as such. And again, these are the people who have smaller, weak nations under them, who work under their influences and carry the material to inflame wars and battles in smaller regions. And they do not know what they are doing, but they are completely under their influence. So, what is the meaning of fi jidiha hablum min masad? In this context, you can understand it well. Otherwise, in the previous context, as believed by the older Tamil commentators to be the correct context, this last verse, fi jidiha hablum min masad, is ununderstandable. Because we know positively that the wife of Abdul Uzza was not hanged, nor was ever a string made out of date trees skin or leaves was put into her neck or round her neck, and she was ever dragged with that. So why does Holy Quran mention a thing which never happened? So that means it carries some other significance, and when you begin to understand this surah to apply to the modern times, then you immediately begin to understand what it means. These smaller nations who are aided by either the Western Bloc or by the Eastern Bloc are always strung and always tied with small agreements and obligations. So that is why the modern world understands this, the usage of the word aid with strings or aid without strings. In fact, there is no such thing as aid without string. All aids are with strings. That is why those smaller nations who accept aids from either of the two powerful blocks, they are like some small weakling, some woman whose neck has been caught in a snooze of strings, and she becomes a sort of slave to these superior powers. Hamalat al-Hatab can be understood. Hamalat al-Hatab means the one who supplies material to build a fire, because firewood is hatab. So how, in what sense do they carry this? You have seen a recent example in the contemporary history. When America decided to punish Iran, America used the good offices of Saudi Arabia and Iraq to invade Iran. These are the smaller nations, or the so-called wives of the big powers, who have the strings tied around their necks. And they carried the fuel, so a war came to be born which raged for years upon years, for almost a decade, and which destroyed so much of the of Iraq and Iran, and ended up in such immense human suffering. It was described as war of attrition, meaningless, purposeful, destruction on both sides. So this is the full meaning, and elsewhere also, what you will see in Israel, what you see in Palestine, in Lebanon, now what you see in Pakistan, what you have observed in Afghanistan. Very seldom will you see direct involvements like you see in Afghanistan, but that was only temporary and partial involvement. But wherever there are explosions in the world, wherever there are wars, there is fire, you will always find behind that fire these great blocks, or some of the countries attached to either of the two blocks. So that is what is mentioned. Tabbat yada abi lahabin wa tab ma aghna anhu maluhu wa ma kasab. Now here the word maluhu is also indicative who these people are. And also in a tradition, these two hands are described in a beautiful way, in a reflective way. Ahad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, describing Dajjal, mentioned that mal ahadin yadane. What are the words exactly, please? La yadane le ahadin le qitalihima. Ahad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam prophesied that two great powers would emerge in the latter days. La yadane le ahadin لِقِتَالِهِمَا قِتَالِهِمْ لِقِتَالِهِمْ. No, there would be no hands, as if people will be without hands to fight them. So God would instruct the Masih Maud, the promised Messiah, whose advent would have taken place around that time, that he should forget about fighting these people or engaging in qital against them. That is to say, fight with material weapons. Jihad of that type will be of no use, because God has not given any other people two hands to fight against the two hands. Which two hands? Tabbat yada abi lahabin. These are the two hands which are mentioned by way of reflection. So no other people will be given such two hands as have been given to the enemy of Islam, so you can't fight them with material weapons. What is the answer? The answer mentioned in the hadith is that God would instruct Masih Maud to pray, and his prayer would be so powerful, and that of his followers, that prayer would dissolve and melt these powers like salt dissolves in water and disappears. So therein also is a message for you. whatever is happening to the world of Islam and the dangers you see coming and crowding from all sides and encompassing the world of Islam can only be fought with prayers which arise from your heart, prayers of such hearts who are totally dedicated and sincere to the cause of Islam and pray to Allah not just from their lips but from the depth of their hearts with deep concern. So that is one prayer which you should remember today, when we get together for the final prayer. You must remember that this is the most important prayer we should make to save Islam from the conspiracies and open, overt and covert attacks by these supreme powers against whom we have absolutely no power to fight them. So, who is Abu Lahab? Two hands we have witnessed, we have seen. According to Hazrat Muslim Maud, each power is separately referred to as one Abu Lahab, and each power has two hands of fire. I believe that this is something else. I believe that Abu Lahab is the Jewish power which controls these two hands. And the two hands are two wings, the western wing and the eastern wing, the two blocks. And Abu Lahab is in fact the Jews who are the supreme conspirators, who have full command over not only the west but also the east. And this fact has been repeatedly revealed in some books where knowledgeable people have categorically mentioned with proofs that although apparently you find the eastern bloc to be at loggerheads with the Jewish powers, but they are still completely controlled by the Jews. For instance, one such book came to my notice, written by Gilas, the late Deputy Prime Minister of Yugoslavia. That is a very wonderful book which reveals all the conspiracies behind the scene, where a man who was directly involved with the study declared it with facts to support his claim. And those facts speak for themselves. If you read that book, you will find out that Gilas had no intention, no other ulterior motives, just to malign Jews because he had no reason why. But he was in close contact throughout this post-Second World War period with all the Eastern Bloc powers, and he has published lists of their cabinets, one after the other, of each country, and proved that still the most powerful people in the cabinets of the Eastern Bloc are Jews. Most of the ambassadors who are delegated to Muslim countries from the Eastern Bloc countries are Jews. And this is how they deceive the Muslim world. The Muslim world believes that these ambassadors are from Yugoslavia, from Hungary, from Czechoslovakia, from Poland, and so on and so forth. And of course they are enemies of Israel and they are committed against Israel. That is why they are complaining against their atrocities. But he proves the point that most of the ambassadors are Jews. So when these Muslim countries innocently speak out their hearts to them and mention, if ever they mention, their plots against the Jewish onslaught on Islamic world, and that is also doubtable. But anyway, whatever they have in mind, they themselves speak out to these people, and their secrets are then diverted to the Jewish hierarchy, wherever it is, either in Israel or America, we don't know. So this is Abu Lahab, who has two hands, and both hands are involved in inflaming the world and wars, creating wars and disturbances. And Abu is the person who benefits from this. The benefit of crime reaches him. So they amass all the wealth which during the wars we know the Jews have been amassing. So this is why Maluhu is mentioned here, Wama Kasaba. From fire, by raising fire, how can you earn anything? If that is what is meant by this verse, as the earlier commentators would have us believe, then we know that Abu Lahab, the so-called Abu Lahab, never amassed any wealth at all. He was an ordinary person. He was not a rich man from among the Meccans who was mentioned as such. So where was that wealth? And what happened to that wealth we don't know. So it's all an imagination. But these people who are the supreme masters behind these great powers, they are known to be the wealth makers. They are the richest people on earth. All the wealth of the world is, if not directly controlled by the Jews, is under their influence and under their command. They control the world financial markets. They control the bullion market. They control the exchange markets of the world. So these are the people who are referred to Ma Aghna Anhu Maluhu wa Ma Kasab. Their wealth and whatever they have earned will come to naught as far as their ultimate designs against the world of Islam are concerned. So that is where also we find this word mentioned in connection with a punishment of fire which is stored for those great powers of the world who will appear in the latter days. And there again we find the mention of the word mal. Walul lil what is it? Yasabu anna malahu akhlada. हाँ पहला क्या है पहली बस वैलुल लिकुल्ले हुमज़त, that's right, yes. वैलुल लिकुल्ले हुमज़तिन लुमज़तिन इल्लज़ी जमा मालुम वअद्ददा. So this verse, because the surahs of the Holy Quran are connected with each other, this verse is explained by that. So this surah is explained by that surah. And there we find Walul likulli humazatin lumazatin illazi jama malum wa addada. The inflamer of wars and hatreds can be summed up in the word humaza lumaza. The mischief monger who creates disorder in the world. Yasabu anna malahu akhlada. He believes that his wealth would give him permanence in the world. No harm would come to him. He will become everlasting because of the great power he controls through his wealth. But it is not going to be so. Kalla la yumbazanna fil hutamate wa ma adraka mal hutama narullahil muqaddatullati tattali wala lafida. If punishment of fire is in store for such people, and that fire will be contained or confined in atoms. Hutama means atom. Small insignificant particle. How can a small insignificant particle store huge fire? It's inconceivable. But in case of atom, and the word hutama and atom are very similar in sounds as well as in meaning, this can be done, and this is done already. So narullahil muqaddatuli, it is not a fire which has been confined to this by people. Already it is in the heart of each atom. This is the fire of God. This is going to be the punishment of these people who will be the masters of fire. So this is the beauty of Allah's irony upon them. They are described to be people who are masters of fire, the builders of fire, those who play with fire against poor people, and who inflame the sentiments of the people of the earth against Hazrat Muhammad Mustafa Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam and his followers. And they helplessly and sometimes blindly follow them, their camp, and abet them in their ulterior and villainous designs. The end product is that they will burn in that fire which they prepare for Islam or against Islam. And this is going to be their end. Sayasla naran zata lahabin vamra'atuhu hammalat al-hatab. These are the people who will burn in the same fire which they are building. And we know that fire is that of atomic bomb and hydrogen bomb and nuclear bomb and whatnot. So God says the fire they will build for Islam, they are going to be ultimately the firewood or the material to be burned in that fire, and this is their end. They will not be able to destroy Islam in any way. So Amratu are people like the countries like the third world countries of Pakistan and Iraq, Iran, etc. Iran has now walked out of this, their clutches. It has loosened the string around her neck, but still it has not found its bearing and direction, unfortunately. So let's also pray that half a step has already been taken by Iran for liberating themselves from the yoke of the West. May Allah lead Iran to take the next step towards Ahmadiyyat and towards true Islam, and make them instrumental in the final victory of Islam, because potentially they have proved that they can offer immense sacrifices. Such are the people which are needed for the ultimate victory of Islam, and Ahmadis do need Iranians to accept Ahmadiyyat and thereby to bring to moderation their reactions and make their paths controllable, scientifically controllable. Not let their fury against the West burst out into flames which also burns and consume themselves. So for that they need superior leadership that comes only from God, and that has already come in the form of Ahmadiyyat. So remember that also in prayer, that may Allah give Iranians an opportunity and grant them this blessing of Ahmadiyyat as soon as possible. We have only half an hour left, about 40 minutes, okay? قُلْ هُوَ اللَّهُ أَحَدٌ اللَّهُ الصَّمَدُ لَمْ يَلِدْ وَلَمْ يُولَدْ وَلَمْ يَكُنْ لَهُ كُفُوًا أَحَدٌ. On this surah, I have spoken during my last many commentaries during the last days of Ramadan, describing the inner structure of these verses and their interrelationship with each other. Now I will discuss their relationship with the previous surah and the following surah, and also their relationship with the rest of the Holy Quran as such. Hazrat Muslim Maud Raziyallahu Ta'ala Anhu has taken the position and also well supported it, and I believe from one point of view he is absolutely right, but there are also other points of view. That is why I have made this introduction. Hazrat Masih Maud ﷺ has looked at the same surahs from a different angle, but has come to the same conclusion fundamentally, that they have connection with Surah Al-Fatiha. So I am going to explain this to you, but let me start with the position taken by Hazrat Muslim Maud radhiyallahu ta'ala anhu. According to him, the Holy Quran completes the discussion of its subjects with the ending of Surah Al-Lahab. The whole of the gamut of questions which were to be discussed by Allah by way of instructing us gets completed with the end of the last word of Surah Al-Lahab. That is his position. So what are the remaining 3 surahs which begin with Qul? They are also a part of the Holy Quran. What is their relationship with the rest of the Quran and particularly Surah Fatiha? So he takes the position that a summary of the whole Quran is contained in the last 3 surahs. And this, of course, we understand some authors do with great success. They discuss a subject, very important subject, and they begin to deviate into various paths and avenues which begin to grow as you discuss that subject, and go into every direction, cover so many areas. Then ultimately, to bring back to your mind to the gist of the substance, and the gist and the substance of the subject matter, they recapitulate the whole subject discussed in that book in the final chapter or final 1 or 2 chapters. So according to Hazrat Muslim Maud, this is exactly the style of the Holy Quran, and the last 3 surahs recapitulate the teachings of the Holy Quran. So he relates them also to Surah Fatiha, which also is the introductory essence of the Holy Quran. So in this way, Surah Fatiha is the introductory essence, and the last 3 surahs are the concluding essence of the subjects discussed in the Holy Quran. Hazrat Masih Maud alayhi salatu wassalam has also taken this position that these 3 surahs, and in fact it was from him that Hazrat Masih Maud alayhi salatu, Hazrat Muslim Maud drew light, of course, that these 3 surahs are reminders of the subjects discussed in Surah Fatiha. The first surah, Qul Huwallahu Ahad, deals with the first part of Surah Fatiha. Qul A'udhu bi Rabbil Falaq. And also, because you say Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen Ar-Rahman Ar-Rahim Maliki Yawmiddin, this you find discussed. Then in the end we find mention of 2 people who have earned the wrath of Allah and displeasure of Allah, one under the title of a Maghdoobi Alayhim and the others under the title of Dhalleen. So Hazrat Masih Maud alayhi salatu wassalam says that this surah Ikhlas or Tafreed or Tawheed, Qul Huwallahu Ahad, refers to Ad-Dhalleen, and Surah Falaq deals with Maghdoobi Alayhim. Also Hazrat Masih Maud alayhi salatu wassalam has mentioned that Surah Lahab is connected with the subject of Maghdoobi Alayhim. So this is something which I forgot to mention. When I came across this observation of Hazrat Masih Maud alayhi salatu wassalam, I was so pleased, because this was exactly the position taken by me, that it is the Jews who are mentioned, and Maghdoobi Alayhim are Jews. So, I bowed down before Allah in prostration and in gratitude that what He had revealed Himself to Hazrat Masih Maud alayhi salatu wassalam, He also led me to reach the same conclusion. Without a message from God, Hazrat Masih alayhi salatu wassalam could never have thought that Surah Lahab is connected with Maghdoobi Alayhim. Because no other commentator has even dreamed of such a thing. And now, as I have explained to you, now you can well understand the connection between Surah Al-Lahab and the Maghdub and the Jews. So Hazrat Masih Maud alayhi salatu wasalam, when he comments on the Holy Quran, it is not just a comment of an ordinary person of great vision, let's say, or great piety. His commentary of the Holy Quran is based on revelation and guidance from Allah. That is why he is the guided one, Al-Mahdi. So sometimes in one sentence, he opens the doors to understanding of a new world of the Holy Quran. New openings are given. New windows and doors are opened. So here Hazrat Masih Maud alayhi salatu wasalam has mentioned that although apparently, normally a person should have thought that the first surah in order should be related to the first word in our order of mention, that is Maghdub. That comes first in Surah Fatiha. And the second surah which follows should be connected with the word Dhalin, because mechanically this would be one's inclination to believe. But Hazrat Masih Maud alayhi salatu wasalam doesn't speak from his own personal internal light alone. That light also, of course, has a part to play. But when it is coupled with the light from heaven, then he speaks. And as such, he says that this surah is connected with Dhalin. And now you understand why? Because it speaks of the unity of God and speaks against the Christian doctrines of Trinity, that God took unto himself a son, or in other words, a son was born unto him. So lam yalid wa lam yulad and qul huwallahu ahad, qul huwallahu samad, all this I have explained earlier to you. I won't repeat it now, but I would recall to you, I would recall this much, that this surah is devoted entirely to the defense of the perfect, indivisible, unsplittable unity of God. Unity of God has nowhere else been described so perfectly, so beautifully, and so well impregnated against all attacks, so beautifully fortified. So if you want to know more about it, you read the commentary of this in Hazrat Muslim Maud's commentary of this surah. And also if you listen to my earlier discourses on this surah during Ramadan here in England, then you will find some new avenues to enlighten you on the subjects which are covered by this small surah, but they are all related to unity. So after Tabbat Yada Abi Lahabin wa Tab, why this surah mentioned, placed in order like this? Because it is in the surah Lahab, attacks on Islam and the final attempt to destroy Islam is mentioned, where both Maghdub and Dhalin have joined forces, where the Maghdub or the Jewish authorities are playing the most important pivotal role in employing the Christian powers, or those powers who are born out of Christian powers, the Russians, I mean. So there you find the final attack on Islam, where all the great enemies of Islam have joined forces. What would be the answer? The first answer is that they will not be able to defeat. First of all, they will burn in their own fires. This has been mentioned there. And because in the front you will find the Christians and the Jews are behind, so they are mentioned first. That is why the order has been changed. Why Dhalin has been brought forward and Maghdub has been deferred to later. Otherwise there is no reason why the order should have been changed, the order of Surah Fatiha, I mean. So now we understand very clearly that Qul Huwallahu Ahad gives us the glad tidings that unity of God as dictated by the Holy Quran, as explained by the Holy Quran, is going to emerge victorious in the end. And the Christian powers are bound not only to be destroyed in their physical and material prowess and strength, but they will be entirely and completely defeated in their doctrinal attack on Islam. And what would emerge would be a unity of God which will be complete and pure, and which would encompass the entire world, as if the ultimate result of this war between the Muslims and the Christians would be that the entire world will be filled with Nara Takbir, Allahu Akbar. There is no God but one, and Muhammad is his messenger. So this is the glad tidings which is given to us in this order of surahs, in the arrangement of these surahs. So Surah Tawheed or Tafreed or Ikhlas, there are so many names of this surah, speaks of this final victory of Islam among other things. Now we turn to Qul A'udhu bi Rabbil Falaq. Say, I seek refuge in the Lord of the dawn. Now a new dawn is to appear. And a dawn has already appeared before. So this dawn, again I am not going to repeat that commentary which I have already made on this surah, and I spoke extensively on this. So this is another aspect now which I want to bring to your attention. A dawn is mentioned. With which dawn it is connected? It is connected first of all with the first appearance of Hazrat sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. Wal fajr wal layalin ashrin wal shaf'i wal watr wal layli idha yasr. So that dawn which has been mentioned in that surah is also followed by a dark night, which will begin to flow in the end. So this surah Falaq also speaks of a dawn and a night which follows. So that means that after the first dawn of Islam, we are told that a night is going to beset. It's going to beset the world. And it will be a long night. How long? And how long would be the dawn? These are the two questions. Hazrat Rasul Akram sallallahu alayhi wa sallam himself has explained what is meant by this. So connect that Fajr and those traditions who speak of these things with this surah, and then you will begin to understand a completely new meaning, a new light will begin to shed upon your minds as to what this surah carries as messages to us, among other things, of course. This is one of the messages which it contains. So this is connected with the subject matter of Surah Al-Fajr, where it is said that Ahmad sallallahu alaihi wasallam has appeared like a new sun, like Sirajam Munira. A new dawn has appeared, a new day has ushered. How long will it last? Ahmad sallallahu alaihi wasallam says that the light which I have brought, which lasts for 3 generations, uninterrupted. That means to say that although it may begin to fade, as we witness, of course, the light at the time of Ahmad is supreme, is so brilliant that it is dazzling even to look at it from such distance as 1400 years. But immediately after Rasulullah we begin to see the signs of gradual darkness and shades appearing here and there. What happened during the time of Hazrat Abu Bakr Siddiq radiyallahu ta'ala anhu, and what happened during the time of Hazrat Ali radiyallahu ta'ala anhu, and Usman, of course, in the period of Hazrat Umar, there seems to be a respite from this darkness. But from what we study of the happened during the period of Hazrat Usman, we can trace those dark elements which raised their head during the period of Hazrat Usman to the age of Hazrat Umar radhiyallahu ta'ala as well. That means to say, some elements of darkness who raised their head first during the first Khilafah got a bit subdued and went underground, because the force of Hazrat Umar was so strong, so powerful, so strong. The control of Hazrat Umar was so forceful and so strong that these fitnas, as we refer to them, these conspiracies and disorderly inclinations of a society or a part of a society, got discouraged very strongly. So they went underground. They raised their head again when comparatively a Khalifa appeared with less command, less powerful command over affairs. So this trend developed further, and ultimately Khilafat-e-Rashida came to an end. That was the beginning of that night. No, not the beginning of the night, the beginning of the fading of the light. Hazrat Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam described the period to be of almost 3 centuries. 3 generations in those days were understood to stand for 3 centuries. So to be exact, Hazrat Muslim Maud has worked it out to be 272 from some muqattat. So that would be the year until which the light of Islam would remain superior, and you could still count that to be the day, the Fajr. After that, a night would creep upon the Muslim world gradually, which would take 1,000 years for its completion. So Hazrat Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam has mentioned this as well. A night lasting for 1,000 years. That night would be followed by Shafa and Watr, by 2 nights and 1. That is 1,300 years. Then the night would begin again to flow. On this I'll speak else later on, because this is a very important subject which has to be elaborated. Otherwise, in this short time, we will not understand it. But this carries us, the first 13 nights, for 13 centuries, carry us to the time of Hazrat Masih Maud alayhi salatu wasalam. In short, I can tell you this, that although a new Fajr has appeared, that is the dawn mentioned again, applicable to the latter days. Qul a'udhu bi rabbil falaq. I come to the secure custody and protection of Allah from whatever the Fajr brings by way of evil as well. A new light has appeared, new dawn has appeared, but also it has brought dangers, and also it has liberated evil forces at the same time, who are trying desperately to defeat that dawn and turn it into night, and to obstruct the passage of light. Because Hazrat Masih Maud Wasalam's Fajr is spread over longer period to appear fully, and because this process is much slower than the first process of the first Fajr of Hazrat Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam's victory over his opponents, so there is a running light along with it, fighting desperately for its survival. and kicking hard to somehow defeat the purpose of this new movement, or let's say the new period, or the word evades me, this revival movement of Islam. Not only the revival, but the final effort on the part of Islam to ultimately overpower all opposition and defeat all other faiths, so that only one faith and one God and one final prophet, Hazrat Muhammad Mustafa Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, becomes supreme in the world. When this would begin, the night would also begin to kick back. This is mentioned in this surah. So it is applicable both to the first part of Islam as well as to the second part of Islam. And this is exactly how Hazrat Masih Maud ﷺ has taken it. So I'll read from one of his writings, and then you will understand. Now, why Maghdoob here? What would be the part played by the Maghdoob in this? This has been referred to min sharrin naffasati fil uqade wa min sharri hasidin iza hasad. The most jealous people against Islam are the Jews. Those who hate Islam most viciously are the Jews. This has been mentioned elsewhere in the Holy Quran. It says, although Christians also would attempt to destroy you, and they are no friends of yours, but there are far more God-fearing people and pious people among Christians than among the Jews. Of course, the Holy Quran says that some of the Jews are also very pious. You can't condemn roundly a people as such. This is a beautiful attitude of the Holy Quran, which is based on absolute justice. It describes the Jews to be the staunch enemies of Islam, yet it pays them the compliment that among them there are good people. But comparatively, it makes it very clear that comparatively more good people, more God-fearing people are to be found among the Christians than among the Jews. Jews, according to the Holy Quran, are so bitterly committed enemies of Islam that they keep on burning within themselves. So the fire, as I have mentioned in one of my sermons or two of my sermons lately, the fire which you witness leaping out against God-fearing people is actually the fire which is consuming the hearts of the enemies, the fire of hasad. And as such, this surah speaks of this and elaborates this point and makes it clear to us that these are the people who are burning with envy because a great final victory is about to occur, about to precipitate, and the final scheme of things is about to be perpetrated in the world. As such, they will burn more and more with the fire of envy, and as such they will behave like Abu Lahab, and they will try to destroy you with the fire which they command. So there is another particular characteristic of these people mentioned in min sharrin naffasati fil uqad. They are the people who are going to breathe into the knots. I have explained this previously, but I'll explain it further from another angle this time. Breathing into knots can mean many things. For instance, the many great Muslim commentators have rightly pointed out that it was a custom with magicians to tie knots of magic and then breathe their charm onto it. The word nafasat should be understood clearly first. It is a word which is not just, it doesn't apply to dry breathing. When you try to extinguish a candle, you breathe into it, of course. But that is not what nafasat means. Nafasat is a breathing in which you find also small spray of your saliva, a sort of wet breathing. You know, when you breathe with such enthusiasm and putting your entire heart into it, that some of your saliva also is made a part of your breath, and you sprinkle small particles of saliva onto what you're breathing upon. So this is the picture described here. But their vicious breathing also has a quality of fire, like the breathing of a dragon. This is the most interesting thing about it. Breathing into uqad means to break the ties. This is one meaning which has not been mentioned earlier by the other commentators, but which I believe is definitely meant here. To breathe into ties, particularly when your breath is fiery and you put your entire hatred and venom into it, it becomes like a wet breathing of a snake or a python whose breath is full of poisonous moistures, but that poisonous moisture has sometimes the quality of burning, the property of burning things on which it is breathed. So the poisonous breathing also has a connotation of fire and destruction. So they breathe into knots means they destroy the ties of people and people, man and man. They create hatred. They divide mankind into warring groups. So Abu Lahab and this effort which is described here, the perpetrator of this crime can be identified as one and the same person. Abu Lahab was exactly doing the same thing as you have just found it mentioned. And this is also doing this. This surah is also creating an image of the similar nature. So by breathing into knots, I understand. Of course, I don't say the other meanings are not correct. The Holy Quran is so full of so many possible meanings. But this is one meaning which you should bear in mind here in this particular context, because then you can understand the flow of the subject discussed in the Surah Abu Lahab, and this subject is further carried into another advanced area of discussion by this surah. So these people would create hatred and divide people against people. This is exactly what we observe. So this meaning is born by the facts of life. The British were described to divide and rule. This was the very essence of their superior diplomacy, through which they ruled a great part of the world, so that sun never set upon their empire. This is not a characteristic of the British alone. They are singled out unnecessarily for this attack upon them. It is of course a compliment, but a negative compliment. All the Western powers do the same thing. America is also doing the same thing. Their second offshoot, Russia, is also doing the same thing. They divide and rule and divide and rule and divide and rule, and that is the breathing into the knots. They blow the knots out with their poisonous fiery breaths. And this is born out of hasad. Now hasad, envy and fire are one and the same thing. in the entire world literature you will find envy related to fire. A consuming fire of envy burns you out, and you try to burn things which you envy, and the objects of your envy, and you want to destroy them and burn them out. So all this subject is well connected. It's not something which I'm putting into the mouths of the Holy Quran. It's exactly what the Holy Quran means and clarifies itself. And some verses of the Holy Quran support the others. As such, this is a very obvious meaning of nafasat fil uqad. So it ends up, وَمِن شَرِّ حَاسِدٍ إِذَا حَسَدَ. This hasad is born out of the glad tiding which we find earlier in Surah Qul Huwallahu Ahad, that despite the best efforts of Christian powers to destroy the unity of God and to gain supremacy in the world of religion over all other faiths, Islam would gain the supremacy and unity will emerge as victorious. This will create great envy, and the envy will be felt most by the Jewish powers. So they will try to break the relations of the world between different peoples of the world and create a situation of world war based on hatred. Now this will be their solution of the problem. But the wars which they will be able to kindle out of their hatred of envy, as has already been mentioned earlier, will consume them themselves. قُلْ أَعُوذُ بِرَبِّ النَّاسِ مَلِكِ النَّاسِ إِلَهِ النَّاسِ. Now here, you must remember that Ahmadiyyat has already come into being. Because the second glad tiding of a morning or a dawn refers to the second advent of Islam. The second the second campaign and struggle of Islam against satanic forces, and so that this second advent of the struggle of Islam would end up in supremacy of Islam over other faiths. Now this is well understood by now. In this context we can reach the second surah which follows, قُلْ أَعُوذُ بِرَبِّ النَّاسِ مَلِكِ النَّاسِ إِلَهِ النَّاسِ مِنْ شَرِّ الْوَسْوَاسِ الْخَنَّاسِ. But I'm sorry, what I wanted to point out was, Ahmadiyyat is already born, so a new type of Jewish characteristic has also come to be born. On the authority of Hazrat Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, not on my conjectures. Because it is made very clear by Huzur Akram Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam that before the advent of Al-Mahdi, before the advent of the promised Messiah, the Muslims in general would have become very similar to Jews. So similar, and those of the Muslims who listen to this dars should not take offense, because if they do, they would be taking offense against Hazrat Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam's comments, not against mine. This is a fact, established fact, there is no shadow of doubt about it. That Hazrat Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam made it clear that before the advent of Al-Mahdi, the Muslims would have deteriorated to a position where they would be so similar to Jews as one of the pair of shoes resembles the other of the same pair. So two Maghzub have been born or will have come to be born before the advent of Al-Mahdi. So they will also join forces. This is the seriousness of the darkness which we confront. Now, the other Muslims have a right to disagree with us that you are the people created by the advent of Al-Mahdi. You have every right to say. But they must agree in principle that if we are not the people, whenever Imam Mahdi appears, whoever will be the people following him would face the Muslim mullahs who would have reached the stage which has been predicted by Ahmad at that time. So the confrontation would be as bitter as it is today. You can postpone this bitterness for some other time, but it's bound to happen. You will have to face the situation that the large majority of the Muslims at one time of their deterioration are bound to resemble the Jewish people in all their ugly characteristics. And that would be the time when the advent of Al-Mahdi or Messiah would take place. So the night which follows, it is a much more deepened night. The darkness has set in even more thickly, because previously Islam faced the enmity from the older Jews and the Christians, the Dallin, which followed the older Jews. Now another force has got added to them, which is the Jews created in the unfortunate world of Islam, who would behave like Jews and of course would oppose the new Messiah as the earlier Jews opposed the earlier Messiah. Hazrat Masih Maud has said exactly this in his commentary on this verse and its connections with the earlier verses. So because the time is short, now I'll turn to this. I'm sorry, the time is even shorter than I thought. कहाँ है वो सिर्फ एक निकाल दें परा. There's so many beautiful commentaries of Hazrat Masih Maud on this subject connected with the last surahs. And I had collected some wonderful excerpts, but I think this one will suffice for the time being, which I have collected. Yes. The translation in the words of Hazrat Masih Maud. तुम ए मुसलमानों नसारा से कहो कि वो अल्लाह एक है, अल्लाह बेनियाज है. He is commenting on the three surahs together. ना उससे कोई पैदा हुआ और ना वो किसी से पैदा हुआ और ना कोई उसके बराबर का है. और तुम जो नसारा का फितना देखोगे और मसीह मऊद के दुश्मनों का निशाना बनोगे. जमात अहमदिया को मुखातब करके फरमा रहे हैं, यूं दुआ मांगा करो. So today's dua would be this dua particularly. Hazrat Masih Maud says that, O Muslims, according to the Holy Quran, Qul means, O Muslims, say to the Christians, because this surah is addressed to Christians. God is one. He is completely independent of you, while you are dependent upon Him. None was born out of Him, nor was He born out of someone else. There is no one equal to Him. So you who will see the fitna of Nasara, or how would you translate fitna in this context, Kamal Khalil Sahib? The vicious conspiracies against Islam by the Christian people and the Christian powers, and those you, O Ahmadis, who would be the target of attacks by the enemies of Masih Maud, the promised Messiah. So clearly he is speaking of some time when he would not be there. This is the time. This is what I wanted to point out. He is speaking by way of prophecy of a time when he is not there, but enemies who hate him would attack his followers Otherwise, if he were talking of his own time, he would say, I would be the target of my enemies. He said, you having committed the so-called crime of accepting me from God would be made the target of their enmities who hate me. So out of my hatred, they will make you target of their conspiracies and hostilities. So, as I have already spoken, God has told us that we have no power to combat them physically. La yadan li ahadin. So when these Muslims, unfortunately, would have joined the enemies of Islam in attempting to destroy the promised Messiah and his people, then the only answer again available to us is prayer. Because this is the message of God to the promised Messiah. So immediately Hazrat Masih Maud turns to this weapon and says, I give you this weapon. Hold it, hold fast to it. Use it. And this is such a powerful, such potent weapon, as it's going to defeat all the vicious campaigns of anti-Islamic forces against you, because you will be the very essence of Islam in those days. If they destroyed you, they would be able to destroy Islam. So you should defend yourself with the instrument of this prayer which I teach you. This is what Hazrat Masih Maud is telling us. यूं दुआ मांगा करो कि मैं तमाम मखलूक के शर से जो अंदरूनी और बैरूनी दुश्मन हैं, उस खुदा की पनाह मांगता हूँ जो सुबह का मालिक है. I seek shelter from Allah from the wiles and viciousness of those enemies who are either exterior or internal. The second class of Jews which I mentioned are the internal enemies. Those who are external enemies, attack from the exterior or internal enemies, from that God who is the Malik, the proprietor of this morning, this new dawn. So in this way he has taught us to pray to God that, oh God, you are the proprietor of this dawn. We are only symbols. We have appeared as a morning on your behalf. So only you can protect this dawn against the overwhelming night and darkness surrounding us. It is you only who can defeat their attempts to destroy us. And if you have decided to save us and develop us into a full day, then this night is bound to be frustrated, and only then it can come to frustration if you help us. Otherwise, we have find no strength against them. So this is our prayer. You join me in this prayer. While I am saying it, in your heart you start praying. It's not necessary to formally raise your hand. Of course, we will do that as well. But the prayer time has started now. खुदा की पनाह मांगता हूँ जो सुबह को मालिक है, यानी रोशनी का जाहिर करना उसके इख्तियार में है. To bring out light from darkness is entirely in his power. और मैं इस अंधेरी रात के शर से जो ईसाइयत के फितना और इनकार मसीह मौद की फितना की रात है. You see how beautifully he has described and connected this. And we seek shelter from you, O our Lord, from that dark night, which is the night of conspiracies and attacks on Islam by the Christian powers and by those who oppose Hazrat Masih Maud in particular. And they have joined hands. उस वक्त के लिए दुआ है जबकि तारीकी अपने कमाल को पहुंच जाए और मैं खुदा की पनाह उन जन मिजाज लोगों की शरारत से मांगता हूं. And I seek Allah's protection against those enemies of Ahmadiyyat, of Hazrat Masih Maud which are feminine in their character, which are not manly. Of course, it is not a reflection against ladies at all. It is an expression in Urdu, which means those who are cowardly, they in the language, Urdu language, are described as having feminine character. So he says that these mullahs would have a feminine character. Why? He'll explain later. उन जन मिजाज लोगों की शरारत से मांगता हूँ जो गंडों पर पढ़ पढ़ कर फूंकते हैं, यानी जो here he has explained the word not in a very beautiful way, but from a different angle than I have explained it. I have described it. He says गंडों पर पढ़ पढ़ कर फूंकते हैं, यानी जो उक़दे शरीयत मोहम्मदिया में काबिल हल हैं और जो ऐसे मुश्किलात और मोज़लात हैं जिन पर जाहिल मुखालिफ एतराज़ करते हैं, इस्लाम के मुखालिफ, और ज़रिया तकज़ीब दीन ठहराते हैं, उन पर और भी इनाद की वजह से फूंके मारते हैं। यानी शरीर लोग इस्लामी दकीक मसाइल को जो एक उक़दा की शक्ल पर हैं, धोखादही के तौर पर एक पेचीदा एतराज़ की सूरत पर बना देते हैं ता लोगों को गुमराह करें। Now this is first applicable to the Christian attempts of the last 1,000 years or more against vilification with regard to vilification of Islam and maligning the character of Hazrat Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. Rushdie's book is just one such attempt in long series. So Hazrat Masih Maud Alaihi Wasallam says that their attack is not manly. You see, by way of fiction. They can't confront you because they have no logic to support them, no strong foundation to stand upon and attack like warriors do. So their attack has a womanish character about it. And when you read the literature of the Orientalists, you will find exactly the same trait and trend in their attacks on Islam. They do it roundly, first of all they would apologize, no, we don't want to attack, but this is, of course, this is that. When you see two women fighting, then you will remember the attacks on Islam carried out by the Western scholars. The women say, you see, I don't mean to say things to hurt you, of course. But this has come to my mind. You are a war, you are such a thing, you are such a thing, you bear dastards and bastards and so on. But of course, don't mind it, please. I'm just speaking something of, which has occurred to me, and this is borne out by such proofs and this and that. So this is the way the women fight with each other. And this is exactly how the enemies of Islam, particularly the Christian scholars, have been doing to Islam and Hazrat Rasul Kareem Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. Always maintaining a sheen of so-called civilization, a sheen of culture and politeness about them. And, directing poisonous darts against the hearts of Islam. So this is what Hazrat Masih Maud Islam has understood by the word Nafasat fil uqade. This is what has been described according to Hazrat Masih Maud Islam. There are difficult points of which are not easily understood in every religion. So they concentrate on that and breathe their poison onto those knots to further make it difficult to understand, or if you understand what is meant there by Islam, you understand it in a negative way. This is the meaning of Nafasat fil uqade as understood by Hazrat Masih Maud Islam. एक तो सरी मुखालिफ और दुश्मन दीन हैं, जैसे पादरी जो ऐसी तराश खराश से एतराज बनाते रहते हैं, as you have seen already, witness. He says, one of those mentioned in this verse are these Christian scholars or religious priests, Christian priests, who attack Islam in this style. Now the second, और दूसरे वो उलमाए इस्लाम हैं जो अपनी गलती को छोड़ना नहीं चाहते और नफसानी फूंकों से खुदा के फितरी दीन में उक़दे पैदा कर देते हैं और जनाना खसलत रखते हैं कि किसी मर्द खुदा के सामने मैदान में नहीं आ सकते, सिर्फ अपने एतराज़ात को तहरीफ तब्दील की फूंकों से उक़दा ला यनहल करना चाहते हैं और इस तरह पर ज़्यादातर मुश्किलात खुदा के मुसले की राह में डाल देते हैं. और दिस इज़ वेरी एप्लीकेबल टू द प्रेजेंट सिचुएशन अगेन, because they run away from confrontation of logic and argument. They run away so much that they have made it positive ultimately by through some legal actions taken against the Jamaat, that they go on attacking us and we are incapable of defending our position logically. We have no right to publish Hazrat Masih Maud's books, for instance, on the plea that they can infuriate the Muslims' sensitive feelings. But the non-Ahmadi ulama are permitted to pick out those portions of those books which, according to them, infuriate the Muslims' feelings and inflame them. So they have become Abu Lahab in that sense too. They are at full liberty to pick out those things and present to the common Muslims out of context, in a manner as they are now never meant to have been written. So that is permissible. But when you make an attempt to falsify their allegations and claims and write logically against their allegations, you are imprisoned, you are involved in lengthy lawsuits and so on and so forth, and sometimes you are beaten and dragged in the streets. Why did you attempt to defend your position? We don't want you to defend your position. We want to attack you just one-sidedly. If this is not that cowardly attitude which is being described by Hazrat Masih Maud, what else is? If there was a man in them, if they were manly enough, they would confront us openly and publicly. And they would give us a right and chance to defend ourselves and to reach out the same public through our arguments. That phase is over now. A time, of course, there was when there were munazaras and debates, and Ahmadis were given equal chance to confront them with counter logic and counter arguments. Now they have escaped into a citadel of laws, enclosed by laws of walls of law, which protect them from counter-attack of Ahmadis. If that's not cowardly, if that's not feminine in character, as Masih Maud has mentioned, then what else is? The Holy Quran has described it by way, again, of a prophecy, although as well as by way of a description of the events of the time of Muhammad. It speaks of Jews who would only fight you locked in their citadels, from positions where they are not vulnerable, from positions where you have no access to them, and only they can attack you, well fortified behind these castles, etc. So this is a new type of fortification which we witness today in the modern world. It is the legal fortification which gives an undue advantage to the mullahs against us, and they don't want to confront us openly without these legal protections, and they have no strength to do it. They have attempted it previously and totally failed. So this commentary of Hazrat Masih Maud made almost 100 years ago was in fact by way of a prophecy. That is what was going to happen, and now it has clearly emerged that this is what was meant by these surahs of the Holy Quran. Two types of enemies and cowardly enemies are mentioned, who would breathe into the knots and try to distort the teachings of Islam and the teachings of Hazrat Masih Maud Wasalam, so that people begin to run away and begin to hate that teaching without understanding that, without being given a chance, in fact, to understand that. So Masih Wasalam says, ज़नाना खसलत रखते हैं, किसी मर्द खुदा के सामने मैदान में नहीं आ सकते. Even they cannot confront a small child in Pakistan, Ahmadiyya child in Pakistan. Repeatedly incidents have been reported to me that one small young man or a child even, in travelling in a bus or in a train, confronted these mullahs with such strong logic that people around who were listeners, they began to be convinced of the superior logic of the Ahmadi child, who was not even educated in religion as such. And when this happened, they ran to the law. They brought the police, had such people arrested. For what crime? Because they held superior logic. And then they sought the protection of those castles which have been mentioned in this commentary of Hazrat Masih Maud Wasalam. So they don't have a man among them to face an Ahmadi child. What to mention? An Ahmadi man, a well scholarly person who is, is fully conversant in Ahmadiyya teaching. वो कुरान के मुक़ज़्ज़िब हैं कि उसकी मंशा के बरखिलाफ इसरार करते हैं और अपने ऐसे अफ़ाल से जो मुखालिफ कुरान हैं और दुश्मनों के अक़ायद से हम रंग हैं, दुश्मनों को मदद देते हैं. That is the second meaning. And this is exactly also what has happened. As I mentioned in one of my sermons on Salman Rushdie, whatever he has, whatever vicious attack he has made on Islam and the characters of Muhammad Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam and his wives, etc., has some root somewhere where some stupid commentators or Muslim scholars have very unfortunately, in their utter simplicity, mentioned some very weak traditions to support this view. So these enemies of Islam have picked out those things. Now, instead of rejecting these weak traditions which have no leg to stand upon, which are totally rejectable, they have no sense, no support, no logic in them, they have contained them in their books, innocently I believe, to begin with. But later on, the present day scholars have also adopted such doctrines as make Islam vulnerable to Christian attacks and the Jewish attacks on issues like terrorism, on issues like compulsion in religion, on issues like the punishment of apostasy in Islam, and so on and so forth. So this is exactly what they need to pounce upon Islam. And even today they fully support the views of the enemies of Islam. This is what Hazrat Masih Maud Wasalam has said. These internal enemies of Islam, they fully support and endorse such doctrines as are attributed to Islam falsely by the enemies of Islam. And they say, yes, we take pride in these doctrines. So they make Islam more vulnerable. So in this way they join forces. So Hazrat Masih Maud Wasalam teaches us to pray to God, to come to His protection, and only His protection would be able to save us. And this morning which has dawned after a long waiting of 1300 years, we seek protection of God, not for just our physical security, but referring to this morning, pleading to Allah that, oh God, this dawn took place after 1,000 years. A long night which had set in of 1,000 years. We saw the face of the dawn and the early signs of the dawn. We are the early signs of dawn. you protect this dawn, this morning which is so dear to you, which is the morning of the light of Hazrat Muhammad Mustafa Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, the morning of the light of Islam, which according to the destiny is bound to turn into a full day. So please see to it that the process of this dawn is not obstructed by the forces of night and by the agents of the darkness. So with that we end the commentary